Our guest today on the Europe Conversation is the Prime Minister of Iceland, Kristrún Frostadóttir. She's planning on holding a referendum on EU membership by 2027 and tells us she hopes the talks are not driven by fear. Prime Minister Frostadóttir, welcome to Euronews and welcome to Brussels.
Thank
Your very
you.
first time.
It is my first time.
First time here and first time as Prime Minister.
Yes.
So what will be your message to EU leaders when you meet them?
Our message for EU leaders is we need to make sure that Iceland and the other EFTA countries are considered as countries within the internal market because we're worried right now. We're worried because of the tariffs. We got a 10% tariff from the US, but we're worried that we'll see an escalation of this tariff war, and there might be some spillovers that might affect our trade relationship with the EU. And it's very important that they know that for a future relationship and also just to keep supply chains open, that we're part of the loop.
Because you're a small economy, of
Yeah.
course. What should be the response from the EU to these tariffs?
I mean, we respect the fact that they want to show their strength. We respect the fact that the EU needs to put its foot down. But we also need a clear message from the EU that they also respect the relationship with its main trading partners. We've always had a historically very good relationship with the EU. Iceland has upheld all its responsibilities when it comes to the EEA. And so just for ongoing positive association and relationship with the EU, I think it's important that the EU shows that we are truly partners in the internal market and that trade won't be affected.
And you said 10% for now.
Yeah.
I saw your finance minister, he wasn't too stressed for now, but what is Iceland's response to these tariffs?
We are not going to respond with our own tariffs. I mean, we believe in free trade. We're a small economy. Our strength in that sense is more how we negotiate our way through those tariffs, but also how we engage with other countries. So we won't be engaging in counter tariffs. Hopefully, we'll see these tariffs go down. But we're also aware of the fact that in comparison to other countries, this is a lower tariff. But I will say our biggest concern now is an escalation of this because obviously most of our trade goes to Europe. We're very driven by exports and imports. And so anything that might affect prices and the way we do business is going to affect our economy directly.
And tell me about the potential EU referendum that you might be having in Iceland as soon as 2027. Is this debate happening because of the geopolitical tensions of late?
Not initially, I would say, though I'm sure it will affect the way we talk about this. My government decided to put the reopening of EU negotiations on the table. That's what this vote is about. Last time when we went through this process, there wasn't an initial vote asking the public whether they wanted to start this process. I think that was a mistake. I think a lot of people feel like it would have been an easier process for us domestically if we had been more in line with public opinion at the time, at least asked the nation what they feel about this. So before 2027, we want to see if the nation wants to reopen these negotiations. And I'm sure the current geopolitical situation will affect it. But I mean, my biggest concern is that we're not able to have a good debate about what it means to open the negotiations, that we will have a polarized debate about this. This is obviously, I think, what most politicians are worried about. And so hopefully we can, get a balanced discussion about EU membership.
And just on the nitty-gritty, last time EU membership was up in Iceland, one of the biggest obstacles, if not the biggest, was your country's fishing industry. And of course, fishing rights, has that changed? And are the locals now willing to share their fleet?
I think that will be our biggest concern. That's also my biggest concern. And so I think it's important that we get to a stage that if we open up these negotiations, that we start off with the difficult discussions first. We left sort of agriculture and the fisheries to be the last chapters that were open. And I think it's important for the Icelandic people, if they decide to open these negotiations with the vote, that they see firsthand how we can negotiate through that. We're going to have to see what comes out of it at this point, but we won't know until we start the negotiations.
And how will Norway feel? Will they be worried about the impact on EFTA and on the EEA?
I'm sure it's going to affect the Norwegians in the same way as if the Norwegians were to join the EU, it would affect us. I think everyone is aware of that. This is obviously a topic that is of discussion there. But like in Iceland, even though this is an international engagement matter, it's still a domestic issue. It's an internal matter. So it's not mine to comment on it. It's for the Norwegian Prime Minister and for the Parliament there to decide.
But one issue you could perhaps comment on is Donald Trump, the US President's various comments about poaching land from other countries. We saw just last week his Vice President, J.D. Vance, over in Greenland, and Putin has hinted he might take Svalbard. They both want a piece of the Arctic Sea, and you're next to it. How does that make you feel?
It's concerning. I will say it's gravely concerning. We are a wholly Arctic nation. I mean, the Arctic is our home. It's not just a concept in international relations for us. It's where we live. And we have very strong ties to the Greenlandic people. So this is of grave concern. I mean, our message has been and will continue to be, you have to respect the sovereignty of nations. The future of Greenland will be decided by the Greenlandic people. They've only just now had a new government formed, and so it's very positive, I would say, to see the unity of that government because it's broad-based. This is obviously a type of talk that should not be considered respectable or okay. Small countries like Iceland, they thrive on the fact that we have international law, that borders are respected.
But what about an army? You don't have an army.
We don't have an army, but we are a full-fledged NATO member. We're one of the founding members of NATO. We have a bilateral defense agreement with the US, and so our defenses have been based on that sort of international cooperation. But it is affecting our discussions of security and defense, for sure.
Well, you mentioned the bilateral relations you have with the United States. Of course, European-US relations now are at a historical low. There's zero trust there. And how's that impacting you then?
It's always been our message to the EU and European countries, whatever makes EU stronger and the Europeans stronger, makes it a stronger ally for the US. And so it's very important for us that any security engagement, any sort of change in that relationship doesn't mean that it's excluding the US, but that it's maybe changing the relationship between the two, because Iceland really thrives on that transatlantic unity being in place. But obviously,
it's not in place now.
It's changing. It's changing for sure. And I think that uncertainty is uncomfortable. It is uncomfortable for a lot of people. That's why we are going through this process of reviewing our security and defense policy.
And as a European leader, you're spending so much time probably reacting to what President Trump said, what he tweeted when you have to run your country as well.
I wasn't expecting to be this much in the international sphere. When I ran on pure social democratic policies, welfare, housing, economy. I ran on sort of a domestic focus. But now we're seeing the international politics sort of come into our arms, and it's just something you have to engage with when you're in this job. I ran on a platform that had direct talks with people instead of just on social media. We did trips around the country. We did open meetings. The same has to happen with international relations. It can't just be something that happens in bureaucratic institutions abroad, away from us. It has to be in the public domain as well, and that's going to be the biggest. It's going to be the biggest challenge, making security in Iceland a concrete matter for the everyday household, and that's what we're going through right now.
And another topic did you run on perhaps as well, climate change, global warming. It could change the Arctic as we know it.
It could change the Arctic, definitely. It also creates, interestingly, these economic opportunities as well. In the north of Iceland, we see mineral opportunities in Greenland. We see shipping routes coming up. But we're also worried for our own economy when it comes to the fisheries, when it comes to changing of the ocean. So this is something that's going to be very important for us.
Well, while you're in town, actually, this week, the EU-Ukraine Association meeting is taking place with the Prime Minister, Denis Shmyhal, in town. How is the war in Ukraine impacting you?
It's raised security concerns in Iceland. Even though Ukraine is geographically further from us than maybe mainland Europe, I do think it's made Icelanders, aware of the fact that this security umbrella or this peaceful umbrella that we've been living under over the past few decades, it isn't a given. We've also had sort of muted security discussions in Iceland over the past few decades, I would say. The American military left in 2005-06, and there hasn't been an open discussion about security threats in Iceland for a long time. And now all of a sudden we're seeing this in our backyard. So obviously our support is fully with the Ukrainian people. We've had donations going there both on military aid and humanitarian aid. But it's also changing the security landscape, and it's something that we have to push forward with.
Would you feel safer inside the European Union?
So we feel safe where we are right now. I wouldn't consider EU discussions or EU accessions as driven by security in and of itself. I've often had this question, especially because we saw Sweden and Finland joining NATO sort of on the back of these security concerns. But NATO is a security alliance, right? It's a defense alliance. The EU isn't a defense alliance in and of itself, even though it's building itself up. We should join the EU as part of a broader picture. I don't want to drive our EU accession talks based on fear. I don't want it based on this is the only possibility we have. This is the only way forward for Iceland. This is the only way to progress. I think that's going to lead to a polarizing debate. I think it's more important to look at EU membership as a broad spectrum, culture, economy, finances, where do we belong? Where do we do most of our trade? Where do we want to be a part of?
So a lot of challenges for you as you just mark 100 days in office. Prime Minister, thank you so much for being our guest here on the Europe Conversation. See you soon.
Thank you.